A town that doesn't remember its beginning. In the year 1842, when the wind still dragged its knuckles across the fields of Dogwood Parish, like a thing half-born and half-forgotten, there existed a house no road dared approach and no map ever drew. The land there seemed to pause before it reached the ridge, hesitant as though wary of what leaned just beyond the line of trees. On that salt-blind rise, cloaked in fog thick as wool and older than memory, stood the Carroway house, a structure so tall and narrow it appeared to lean left in permanent eavesdrop as if listening to something buried in the dirt. No one alive could recall who first named the house nor why, but everyone spoke of it in a hush, a name wrapped in linen and salt, meant to protect the tongue that dared utter it. The building itself defied architecture boards, warped, but unrotted windows tall and thin like morning eyes, roof angled not by storm, but by some unseen pressure from within. It gave the impression that it was not built, but remembered into being a manifestation of grief that never found form. It did not settle into the earth like other homes. It clung to it, and the earth, in turn, recoiled. Dogwood Parish was not the kind of place you stumbled upon. It did not welcome travelers, nor did it warn them away. It simply watched. The town had no founding plaque, no welcome sign, only the absence of forgetfulness. Children were taught never to draw near the ridge, though few could explain why. Farmers kept their herds grazing west, preachers avoided sermons about birth or the body. And above it all, above the tremble of old hymns and the hush of creaking porches, stood that crooked house, like a sentinel of something older than death, the sisters who came. Barefoot and wordless, within the house lived three sisters, Unarnis Ha, and Merbth Carroway, whose names sounded like wind through bones and whose presence always carried the scent of lye smoke and something sweet like sap on old bark. No one in Dogwood remembered their arrival. They had simply always been. Their faces bore a shared pallor like moonlight on milk, and their eyes seemed set a second too deep as though peering through layers others could not perceive. Always clad in mourning black, their dresses stitched from what looked like crow feathers and widow's gauze, they moved with the precision of memory, not motion. They were never seen apart. Like a single body with three shadows, the Carroway sisters walked in silence across the parish whenever labor took a dangerous turn or when a child refused to come. They carried nothing more than baskets slung over arms, sometimes herbs, sometimes cloth, sometimes nothing at all, and walked barefoot regardless of frost or thorns. Their steps left no prints, and their arrival brought not relief, but stillness. The town doctor had long ceased to attend difficult births. When blood ran too fast or breath came too slow, it was not he who was summoned. It was them. They never knocked. Doors would creak open on their own. They entered like dusk, gradual, inevitable, impossible to stop. And they did not leave until the task was finished, whether the task was saving the child, saving the mother, or burying what refused to be born. A ledger of breaths never meant to last. The first recorded trace of the Carroways didn't appear in any church ledger or census roll. Instead, it was discovered years later, buried beneath a whitewashed cross at the edge of the ridge. Beneath rusted tin and rotting leaves, a thin ledger lay sealed with wax that smelled of rosemary and bile. The entries were few, each scrawled in trembling ink and listing only the first name of the departed and the cause of death. Eliza, ruptured womb. Charity, breech birth. Ruth, bled dry. Each name was followed by the same cryptic marking E, A, C, M, Z. The town didn't need translation. It was them. It had always been them. What disturbed the townsfolk most was not the list itself, but the rhythm it implied. There were no violent deaths, no murders, just the kind of withering meant for those caught between worlds too long, souls held too tight or let go too soon. These weren't stillbirths or tragedies. These were exchanges. And yet, despite the unease, families continued to call for the sisters. They whispered their names in barns, beneath floorboards, behind Bibles. Because the alternative was worse silence or death, or worse still, a child who returned wrong. Because the sisters, for all their strangeness, delivered. The babies came back breathing. Most of them did, infants that would not cry. One winter, a farmer named Jonah Bray held his newborn son in trembling hands and waited for a sound that never came. The child stared, unblinking, unmoving, with eyes too old and a mouth that refused even to root. The doctor declared him living, but not alive. When Jonah tried to bring him to the chapel for christening, he found the font bone dry and the altar slicked with dead flies. The holy water had curdled without touch, and the pews reeked of milk left too long in the sun. By spring, the whispers had taken root like mold beneath floorboards. In the market square, mothers with shaking hands traded stories under the shadow of the old stone well. One baby would only sleep if laid in salt. Another wept blood at dusk until the Carroways placed a dry reed under her pillow. A third stopped breathing every Sunday, then resumed at moonrise. The preacher's wife, grieving 2 sons lost to fever, swore she saw Carroway burying something beneath her garden's elder tree, wrapped in hair and twine pulsing. When she confronted the sister merely smiled and said, "It will keep the spirits from gnawing." No one knew whether she meant the dead or the living. The preacher's wife left town the following week. Her newborn had no shadow and refused to speak the Lord's name. Where the sisters touched the church, withdrew. That summer, the church bell fell silent. Not from rust, not from neglect. Someone had sliced the rope clean through deliberate, practiced, and surgical. No one admitted to doing it, but everyone suspected the same 3 women who never bowed, never crossed themselves, and never recited verse. They had never stepped inside the chapel, not once, yet their absence echoed louder than hymns. Still, when sickness came, when ash fever swept through Dogwood and took 12 in a single week, it was Eunice who appeared barefoot and calm at every doorstep. She placed bowls of boiled bark beneath cribs, whispered in languages that bent the air, and held the sick not with touch but with presence. Those who survived spoke of dreams thick with the sound of hooves, the pressure of a cool hand on their chest, holding something down inside them. The doctor called it fever dreams. The preacher called it blasphemy. But Eunice, ever still, ever watching, only said, "The veil weakens when the body burns, and some things must not slip through." The boy who came back wrong. It was a night thick with fog when Levi Donald vanished into the tree line. His older brother dared him just knock once on the Carroway door and run. Levi had always been small for 10 more bone than boy, but brave in the way children often are when they believe nothing truly waits in the dark. He disappeared just past dusk, barefoot shirt tucked into his waistband like armor. The whole town was asleep when he returned hours later, walking backward through the cornfield with his face tilted toward the sky. He wouldn't speak. Not when his mother wept and shook him. Not when the doctor waved sage smoke under his nose. Only when the preacher pressed a trembling hand to Levi's clammy forehead did the boy whisper a single word: wailing. By morning, his hair had turned white as salt. One eye drifted inward as though it had grown tired of looking outward. He stared through walls, through people, through time. Within a week, the Donald family left town. Without farewells, their windows boarded from the inside. The only evidence they had lived in Dogwood at all was the ring of dead grass where their garden once grew, and the faint outline of tiny handprints pressed deep into the soil outside the Carroway gate. The prints were too small for any of the sisters, too deep to be dismissed. Something had reached out not to hold Levi, but to change him, or return something that had been taken long before he was born. When the trees refused to let go, autumn came, but the leaves did not fall. The oaks and elms clung to their brittle brown canopies like fists refusing to open. The air hung thick, not with rot, not with smoke, but with the anticipation of both. Livestock miscarried in pairs. Crows lingered on fence posts long after dusk. No one could say why, only that the wind stopped whispering and began to listen. Yet the Carroway sisters carried on. A stillbirth in the south orchard. A breech delivery near the river bend. Each time one of them arrived before word could even be sent. It was as if they could sense labor before it began, like dogs before a quake, or wolves tracking something warm beneath the snow. Some townsfolk began to believe the sisters no longer responded to need they anticipated it. Or perhaps they summoned it. One story passed between families like a warning disguised as wonder. A mute girl named Elise, her voice lost to a lightning strike, gave birth to twins under the sisters' care. She claimed the sisters never touched her, only sat around her bed in silence, humming in a harmony so precise it made the room grow too bright to see. The children were born with their eyes open. One never cried. The other smiled for 6 weeks straight through sleep, through feeding, even while choking. 6 names. One conclusion. When the frost finally set in, the town council convened in secret beneath the chapel's floorboards. 4 men and 2 widows, each holding lists. Names of those who had suffered strange births. Names of those who had fallen ill in unnatural ways. Names of those who'd seen things they couldn't explain. Every list ended with the same surname, Carroway. The preacher, who had once defended them as harmless spinsters, now stared blankly at the knotted grain of the wooden beam above. "God turns his face," he muttered, and would say no more. After a long silence, the council agreed to pay the sisters a visit, not to accuse, not to threaten, but to express gratitude, and in doing so, see what might be seen. 3 men volunteered, 1 for each sister. Only 2 returned. The third, Joel Minton, a leather tanner with hands like river stone, was last seen walking up the Carroway ridge at dusk. He carried a satchel of elder flour and a peace offering of lamb's wool. His satchel was found days later, unopened, beside the creek. His boots sat upright on the Carroway porch, bone-dry despite the rain. He was never found. When dread became the crop, by the year's end, something shifted in Dogwood Parish. Births dropped nearly to none, not from infertility or illness, but fear. Couples shared beds, but not bodies. Lovers kept to separate corners. Husbands carved separate doorways between rooms. The town grew quieter. Fields lay fallow, not from frost, but from dread. Farmers avoided planting as if the seeds themselves might wake something. Mothers began whispering strange things to daughters, warnings shaped like lullabies. "Don't smile at the moon. Don't cry near mirrors. Don't open your mouth unless you've tasted salt. Children grew silent. Some shifted subtly with the season's hair lightening in winter eyes, darkening in spring. Their features no longer matched the portraits on the mantel, and still the Carroway sisters moved among them, rarely now in threes, usually just one or two walking through morning fog with their heads down and arms full of bundles too still to sway. No one called for them anymore, but they came just the same. The stranger who never crossed the threshold. One cold night a stranger arrived. He came from 3 counties over dust trailing behind his horse like breath in the dark. He carried a wax-sealed letter and a crucifix carved from burnt yew. No one knew his name, only that he rode like a man who'd been summoned, not sent. As he crested the Carroway ridge, his horse stopped short, hooves locking. The beast trembled, refusing to step forward. So the man dismounted. He walked the rest of the way alone. The sun rose red the next morning, casting long shadows across the frost-covered fields. But the stranger was never seen again. No crucifix, no letter, no prints. Only the wind remained low circular, curling at the edges of things as if the land had begun breathing again. And on the ridge above Dogwood Parish, the Carroway garden bloomed out of season, lush, overgrown, humming with insects no one could name. Blossoms the color of bruises clung to stems that pulsed faintly, and roots burst through fence posts like veins seeking marrow. The parish knew then they had not been visited. They had been marked. The garden that knew your name. It wasn't just that the Carroway garden bloomed during a drought, it bloomed with intention. Pale roots pushed through rotted fences, blossoms opened in silence, and vines pulsed like arteries beneath the soil. The air near the ridge buzzed with a sweetness that soured on the tongue, the scent changing mid-breath from ripe fruit to spoiled milk. Children who wandered too close returned, marked. One boy came back with palms blistered and raw, claiming the plants whispered his name. Another was found with a shard of what appeared to be tooth too long, too sharp, embedded in his ankle, though no blood surrounded the wound. A schoolboy, drawn by the sickly sweet perfume, described vines that moved on their own. They breathed, he whispered. They knew I was there. The doctor dismissed it as sun fever, a common diagnosis for things science could not explain. But the boy's mother fled town within a week after waking to find her front door nailed shut from the outside and her curtains twisted into tight, deliberate knots that, when unfurled, spelled her son's name. From then on, the Carroway garden was not spoken of, only avoided. And still it grew. The yellow-bonneted midwife. She arrived without warning on foot from Clark Hollow, wearing a yellow bonnet and carrying a copper basin wrapped in hemp cord. She claimed to be a midwife, said she'd received a letter that she'd been summoned by one of the Carroways for a difficult birth. But no such letter had been sent, and no one admitted to writing it. The town bristled at her confidence, her insistence, the way she spoke their names aloud in the market square like they were ordinary. Still, she followed the ridge path as though she'd walked it in dreams. For 2 days, no one saw her return. On the 3rd morning, the preacher's hound was found foaming at the mouth, fur welted in the shape of fingers. The copper basin turned up in the creek bed, blackened, warped, as if it had been set ablaze from within. The midwife herself was never seen again. That night, singing was heard from the ridge. 3 voices, as always, but now joined by a fourth. Thinner, higher, and not quite human. The one who walked alone. Mabeth Carroway had always been the youngest, the one who trailed behind the one with the wide eyes and hesitant hands. When she began appearing alone, it unsettled the town more than if all three had come. She moved like a thread unraveling her apron, stained with something too red to be wine, too brown to be rust. Her lashes had fallen out. Her skin looked stretched thin over something harder than bone. She was first seen standing at the post office, staring at the flagpole as the sun rose. When the shopkeeper offered a greeting, she replied with one word, "Measure." Then she turned and walked away. That same day, the floorboards of the schoolhouse groaned with the discovery of a pattern carved deep into the wood concentric circles around a single eye, repeated identically, impossibly. The teacher left without collecting her pay. Her replacement lasted 3 weeks before quitting in a panic, claiming the chalkboard had begun writing names on its own, names of children not yet born or never meant to be. Mabeth was seen watching from the edge of the trees. She never came closer, but she never turned away. 41. Nails and a cradle of silence. Eunice was the next to step forward. One morning, before the forge had been lit, she walked barefoot into the blacksmith's yard, with hands wrapped in gauze and sleeves that bore no soot. Her voice steady as Ash requested a specific order. 41 nails. Not coffin tacks. Not horseshoe nails. Just 41. When asked why, she answered, one for every breath he wasn't supposed to take. The blacksmith, too afraid to ask further, gave her the nails freely. That night he didn't sleep. His wife later told neighbors he woke screaming, clawing at his chest, claiming something was hammering inside his ribs. He died 3 days later. No wounds, no explanation. After his burial, the nails were found beneath his pillow, arranged in the shape of a cradle. The physician called it grief. The preacher called it judgment. But those who had seen the way Eunice moved through silence knew better. She had not come for assistance. She had come to return what was owed. The child already named. On the edge of Weathersfield, a girl named Maynard Pearl returned from the woods, barefoot, dazed, cradling an infant with hair too fine to catch the wind and skin pale enough to glow under moonlight. No one had seen her for months, not since she vanished into the trees near Carroway Ridge after her father's funeral. She said she didn't remember the birth, only the breathing that wasn't hers. When asked the baby's name, she simply said, "He already has one." The child did not cry, did not nurse. It only watched. Within a week, the Pearl house drew its curtains and stopped lighting its chimney. A neighbor girl who dared peek through the window swore the baby no longer lay in the cradle, but sat at the table, staring at the family as they prayed. By the end of the month, the house was empty, and Hester Carroway returned not by foot, but by fire. Ashes in linen and the circle that would not grow. When Hester Carroway returned, it wasn't with a knock nor a whisper, it was with fire. Witnesses on the far side of the parish saw a steady orange glow bloom at the crown of the ridge just after midnight. It did not flicker like lantern light or dance like hearth flame. It pulsed slow and deliberate, like the breathing of something sleeping beneath the earth. And yet no smoke followed. No ash drifted on the wind. There was only the sound iron rasping against iron shears dragged across bone. At dawn, Ha stood in the center of the town square, barefoot. Her skirt soaked the hem stiff with something that darkened like blood but dried like salt. In her arms, she carried a bundle wrapped in stiff funeral linens creased as though already buried. Without looking at anyone, she placed it at the base of the town's dried-up well. "It belongs to the earth now," she said. Her voice cracked like old parchment. No one approached, but flies did fast and thick. By dusk, the bundle was gone, and in its place remained a perfect circle of soil, smooth and hairless. Nothing grew there again, not even moss. A week later, a young boy stepped into the circle during play. He emerged with his jaw clenched shut. He would not open it again, not to eat, not to speak, not to scream. Not even when his tongue turned black and fell from his mouth like a leaf in winter. Bells without ropes and sisters without names. That winter silence spread through Dogwood Parish like a second frost. Not the silence of rest, but of watching. The church bell, long since silenced, began to toll again, once sharply each night at 3 o'clock. No one had repaired the rope. No one had climbed the tower. The sound echoed low and hollow, like the dying breath of a thing too big to name. Livestock gave birth to malformed litters. Milk turned sour before it left the teat. Families began hearing the same sound in their sleep. Not a voice, not a melody, but a low rocking like a cradle creaking in a room no longer part of the house. The sisters were seen more than ever, but never together. Always walking single file through the woods, bearing jars filled with bone-cooled wax or cloth bundles stitched with indecipherable symbols. Once, a traveling reverend attempted to intervene. He disappeared on the ridge. All that was found were his boots upright and a torn page from his journal pinned behind the chapel's cross with a nail made of milk glass. The page bore only 5 words, written in blood and panic. "They are not just midwives." When the parish began to fade. By early spring, Dogwood Parish was unraveling, not like something breaking, but like something being unwound. Families did not flee in chaos. They simply vanished in silence. Curtains left fluttering, cradles rocking, doors ajar, wagons packed under starlight. No goodbyes, just absence. The Carroway house remained. Crooked, still, its chimney barely smoking. No one approached, but everyone felt it. And worse, everyone remembered it, not with clarity, but with a sense of inheritance. As if they had always known the house would be there long after they were not. A traveling priest from another county arrived and offered to bless the chapel, but when he entered, the altar was missing, and the crucifix had been turned backward. He followed a trail of white feathers to the ridge and never returned. 3 nights later, 3 infants were found across the parish, each swaddled and left at doorsteps. None had mothers. None bore names. But each had a stitch at the base of the neck threaded in hair. The parish buried them. But when the thaw came, the ground refused to hold. A humming not meant to be heard. As the season changed, a new sound began to echo from the ridge each night. Not the shriek of coyotes or the creak of trees, but something deeper, more deliberate, layered. It rose just after the second bell and ended before dawn, a sound like humming, but slowed and drawn out like breath, being pulled from lungs too tired to exhale. One man, overcome by curiosity, filled his ears with cotton and nailed a crucifix to his chest. He walked toward the sound. He was found hours later in his barn, naked from the waist down, hands clasped in prayer, mouth packed full of dried lavender. He lived 3 days more. In that time, he spoke only 1 sentence over and over to his grieving wife. It was not song. It was stitching. The night he died, every candle in town flared blue, then winked out together, leaving behind silence that seemed to vibrate against the ribs. Threads in smoke and teeth in the walls. That spring a new family arrived. The Whateleys traders from the east moved into the old parsonage with bright hopes and firm hands. They reopened the schoolhouse, held supper gatherings, hung new curtains. On their second week, their daughter Miriam found a parcel wrapped in oiled skin beneath her bed. Inside, a braid of white hair tied with milkweed and a note written in spidery cursive. The first breath must not be wasted. Her mother, alarmed, burned the braid in the stove that night. The stove burst open not with fire, but with smoke. Salt-sweet, thick, the smoke crawled across the walls in the shape of 3 open hands. By morning, Miriam was gone. Her boots were placed neatly on the windowsill laces, soaked in honey. When asked, no one offered help. No one spoke the sisters' names. Not anymore. Old warnings in new tongues. After Miriam's disappearance, the townsfolk began falling back into old rituals. Rituals they didn't remember learning. Doors were marked with lamb's blood. Bibles were slipped beneath pillows and not opened again. Mirrors were covered with sackcloth from dusk till dawn. Mothers stopped teaching their children prayers and instead taught them to count backward, to bite their tongues when thunder cracked, and to spit 3 times when the wind changed direction. Even so, the Carroway presence thickened. Footprints appeared in ash. No one walked through. Cradles rocked when the air was still. A newborn named Tobias was said to sing in his sleep strange lullabies, soft and low, in a language that made the windows shiver. His father tried to transcribe the melody, but the pen cracked bleeding ink in the shape of a cradle. 2 weeks later, Tobias was gone. No illness, no cry. In his place was a mound of river clay, still wet and bearing the deep impression of a mouth. The midwife who came to prepare the burial quit that same night. She left barefoot, stepping into the marsh and disappearing into the reeds. She didn't take her cloak. She didn't look back. The crow gathering. By midsummer, the birds had stopped singing. No crows, no thrush, no rustling in the trees. Just silence wide and deep. The sisters were no longer seen in threes, only in pairs, moving like shadows through the stalks, their baskets heavy but unmoving. No one dared ask what they carried. A farm boy named Caleb was tasked with watching the grain one evening. As dusk settled over the field, he saw Eunice Carroway standing waist-deep in the wheat, arms outstretched, still as stone. Then one by one crows began to land on her, first her shoulders, then her arms, then her head. She did not flinch. She did not blink. He watched until his eyes stung. When he blinked, they were gone, and so was she. He returned home with his mouth full of black feathers. Couldn't speak. Couldn't cry, just sat breathing slowly, feathers slipping out one by one, brushing his lips. That same night, the parish bell fell from its tower. There was no wind, no storm, just a sudden groan of iron, then silence. When the dust cleared the crater it left behind bore the unmistakable shape of an open hand. The children who watched too closely. As summer waned, the Carroway house appeared empty. Its shutters never moved. Its curtains stayed closed. No light flickered from within. But a warm, sour scent, like milk steeped too long in cloth, hung on the breeze, and the children born that season were not like others. They were too quiet, too still. Their eyes were large and glassy, too dark to catch the light. They didn't cry, didn't fuss, just stared unblinking as if waiting for something. One mother brought her child to the chapel to be baptized. She claimed the baptismal water turned to steam. Another swore her baby's skin blistered beneath the touch of the cross. Stories began to spread of twins born under the same moon yet breathing out of sync, of a girl who wept blood only when the ridge faced east, of infants who whispered in their sleep in voices that didn't belong to them. The sisters were last seen together on the edge of the cornfields, standing still as scarecrows, their arms wrapped in swaddling cloth. Behind them something shifted in the stalks, taller than any man, and breathing not with lungs, but with memory. Harvest of unmaking, September brought with it a harvest no one touched. Corn grew in spirals contorted and tense. Pumpkins split open before ripening, revealing pulsing veins instead of seeds. Even the wheat turned brittle, snapping underfoot like bird bones. At the edge of the farthest field where soil had never produced more than stone, a new crop emerged. Tall stalks with velvet-red tassels. When cut, they wept a syrup clear and sweet sticky as blood thinned with sugar. No one had planted them. Each morning more appeared. The sisters walked the rows in silence, trailing long-handled shears that never rusted, never dulled. They moved like they were harvesting memory, not plants. Bethany Lorne, a curious and unafraid young woman, stole one stalk under the moonlight. She brewed a tea from its leaves. Her mother found her 3 days later, sitting upright in the orchard in her wedding gown. Her hair was perfectly braided. Her hands were clasped around a bundle of moss. Her eyes had been stitched shut, her mouth stretched into a smile that showed every tooth. Each tooth bore a name scratched into the enamel. None of them were hers. Fog that ate the clock. October arrived under a fog that didn't lift. It settled low like a woolen shroud, muffling the sound of hammers and hymnals alike. Time bent beneath it, clocks ran backward, roosters crowed at dusk, and graves grew cold even in daylight. Mobth Carroway was seen walking the river bank, barefoot, pressing her palm to the water over and over, as if listening for a heartbeat beneath the current. Children reported lullabies drifting from wells and drains. One girl vanished for half a day, then reappeared dry and confused her fingernails, soft as if she had been underwater for years. She no longer answered to her name. She called herself the Small One and insisted she had not yet been born. Then one morning, a midwife's ledger appeared, nailed to the chapel's door. The final entry bore no date, no mother's name, only a location scrawled in soot beneath the ribs. That evening, sap bled from the chapel windows. The pews were found turned to face the walls. The town no longer prayed, but it listened. The house that refused to die. As autumn deepened, the Carroway house stood unchanged, crooked, silent, watching. Its windows never flickered with light, yet a warmth clung to the ridge like breath held too long. Though snow hadn't fallen, frost clung to fences. Wood no longer absorbed moisture. Leaves curled in on themselves like ears listening to a voice only the wind could carry. Children born that season were not loud. They were not restless. They were watchers, wrapped tight, their dark eyes unblinking, too large for their faces. Their mothers refused to bring them near the chapel. One mother claimed the baptismal basin hissed and turned to steam. Another watched as her infant's skin blistered when a cross was laid near his chest. Stranger still were the patterns, twins breathing in alternate rhythm as if sharing a single breath. A girl who wept blood only at sunrise when facing east. An infant whispering lullabies in sleep in a language no elder could name. One father kept a journal. He woke to find pages filled with markings he had not written, cradle-shaped spirals, rows of teeth drawn in red ink that smelled faintly of milk and brine. The sisters were last seen at dusk on the edge of the cornfield, standing motionless, their arms wrapped in swaddling cloth, their faces turned towards something moving behind them. Not a man, not an animal, something taller, something that breathed not air, but memory. The harvest no one claimed. By the end of October, the harvest rotted before it could ripen. Gourds split with veins instead of pulp. Apples collapsed inward as though they had exhaled and never inhaled again. In the farthest field where nothing but stone had grown for generations, a new crop spread like infection. Tall stalks that bled when broken, their sap sweet and sharp as vinegar. No one claimed to have planted them. Each dawn more emerged. The Carroway sisters walked the rows with long-handled shears, clipping with a rhythm like song, though none of them sang. They did not collect the cuttings. They left them lying in the soil like offerings. Bethany Lawn, stubborn and curious, crept into the fields and stole one stalk. She brewed tea from its leaves, sipping it alone under moonlight. She was found 3 days later, seated in the orchard, upright and serene in her wedding gown. Her hair was plaited in perfect braids. In her lap, a bundle of moss wrapped in swaddling cloth. Her eyes had been stitched shut with a single red thread. Her mouth stretched into a wide, unmoving smile. Each tooth bore a name etched in careful strokes. None of them were her own. The fog that learned to breathe. November fog did not lift. It swallowed Dogwood Parish whole, thick enough to muffle footsteps to bend sound backward. Hammers struck without echo. Bells failed to carry. Graves wept sap. Clocks ran erratically, some backward, others pausing, some ticking faster until their hands spun loose. Marbth Carroway walked the river bank barefoot, her palm pressed to the water again and again. She did not look up. Children claimed to hear lullabies and drains in well shafts behind attic walls. One girl vanished before dinner and returned after sunrise. Dry, blinking, but her fingernails had softened and bent inward. She no longer answered to her name. When asked, she replied, "The small one." Then a ledger appeared nailed to the chapel door, the midwife's journal. Its final entry bore no date, no mother's name, only a location beneath the ribs. That evening, sap bled from the chapel's windows. Inside, the pews had turned to face the walls. The altar bled moss, and in the quiet that followed, no one dared breathe too loud. The thread that pulled from within, the frost crept slowly with the patience of something remembering how to arrive. Chairs shifted by themselves. Bed sheets folded at the corners. Floorboards groaned at dawn, though no one moved. The Carroway Ridge, once feared, once avoided, became something worse familiar. Even travelers who'd never heard of Dogwood stopped at its slope. A butcher from Calhoun wept when he saw the crooked house. "I dreamed this place," he said, "the room I was born in, the one no one remembers." His body was found days later lying across a patch of furrowed earth, arms outstretched, jaw unhinged. A tree nearby bore the imprint of a swaddled infant pressed into its bark. Deep, deliberate. It wept sap for 7 days. Children in Dogwood began drawing circles, not on paper, but on skin. On walls, into flower, into their own arms, always the same shape, 3 points in a cradle formation inverted. Teachers tried to intervene, but the schoolhouse walls began to change. Flowers wilted, wallpaper peeled in spiral patterns. The drawings never stopped. They only grew more precise. The boy who understood the silence. A boy of 9, mute since the first frost, walked into the chapel, ruins with something wrapped in linen. He placed it gently on the pulpit. It was not breathing, not a doll, but the linen pulsed slightly like memory holding its breath. He looked around the empty pews and whispered, "Not all births come from blood." That evening thread was found again, woven into the hinges of doors, braided into the manes of dead horses, curled inside ears of corn, hung in dark attics. It glistened pale and sticky, translucent like the webbing of unborn things. It was everywhere and impossible. When burned, it did not turn to ash. It released a sound, instead a sound like cloth, pulled slowly through teeth. The people of Dogwood no longer feared the sisters' return. They feared something much older that the sisters had never left. A quilt for the unborn. Ruthie Cooper was the youngest daughter of the apothecary. She had wide eyes and a mouth always poised for a song, though she hadn't sung since the first frost. One morning, on her way home from the empty schoolhouse, she found a cloth bundle on the chapel threshold, folded neatly, deliberately. The fabric was stained, deep umber, soft as breath, and embroidered with 3 symbols no one could translate. The lines were thick, sharp, deliberate, stitched, not by hand, but with purpose. Ruthie brought it home, believing it to be a forgotten doll's quilt. She wrapped it around a bundle of hay and sang lullabies to it until dusk. Her voice returned as if summoned soft and eerie bending notes that didn't belong to any known tune. At midnight, her mother woke to find Ruthie at the foot of the bed. She didn't speak. She only stood there, hands wrapped tightly around her own throat, her palms raw. Her lips bore fine needle pricks as though stitched and unstitched in the same breath. On her tongue, barely visible, was a single stitch, tight, bloodless, and humming faintly. The father claimed he burned the cloth that night. But Ruthie was never quite the same. She stopped speaking again. She stopped blinking. She began sleeping with her eyes open, always turned away from windows. The doctor examined her and found nothing, except that her tongue was gone. Not severed, not scarred, gone as if drawn back into some unseen root. Cradles in the fog. That week the birds returned, but they no longer sang. They perched in rows along rooftops and fences, facing inwards toward the homes of Dogwood Parish. They stared into windows. They did not blink. They did not move. Then came the sound. Low at first, almost imperceptible, like wood rocking on wood. Night after night it grew louder until the entire town groaned with it. People believed it to be trees shifting, but the noise only came when the wind was still. One woman, unable to sleep, followed the sound barefoot through the fog. Her breath steamed in the air, her pulse drummed in her ears. She stopped when she reached the base of the ridge and gasped. There in the meadow stood over 100 cradles, empty, rocking, each one swaying gently though the air lay still. The wood was weathered but unrotted. The fabric was old but unsoiled. In the center of them stood the sisters. At the front, eyes closed. Eunice beside her, one hand raised, and Marpth behind both arms, extended thin thread strung between her fingers, not sewing, but listening. The woman turned and fled. By morning, her hands were stitched at the wrists. Beneath her blouse, 6 tiny dots curved like a second smile traced her chest. She never spoke again, only hummed. Boneless fruit and silent eggs. as August gave way to what should have been harvest dogwood. Parish ceased to resemble any town remembered by man. The wells ran clear but tasted of ash. Fields stood tall, crops upright but hollow. Apples folded under their own weight, collapsing inward like lungs that refused to inflate. Chickens laid eggs shaped like teardrops. Inside not yolk, but a pulpy, silken substance that shimmered wet in the light. One farmer cracked an egg and found a miniature jawbone within soft, wet perfect. He left town the next day, dragging his daughter behind him in a wagon filled with salt blocks and hymnals whispering over and over, "These births aren't births. They're returns." That's when the stranger came. Not a peddler, nor a priest, but something in between. He called himself Parson Authridge and carried a dog-eared Bible and a warped tin crucifix. He had heard rumors in the counties beyond the ones where maps still mattered, rumors of stillborns that sang of midwives who stitched names into breath of children whose eyes opened before they were born. He arrived with sermons heavy on fire and salvation. But Dogwood didn't need salvation. It needed silence. The infant that didn't cry. Parson Authridge slept in the chapel that night, though the roof was long gone and the floorboards still wept sap. He awoke just before dawn to the sound of dripping. Water no slower, thicker. He followed it. In the pulpit sat a wax infant, its eyes hollow, its feet stitched shut. A thin, clear liquid seeped from its chest, steaming as it hit the stone. The parson stepped forward, reached out and touched its brow. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He only wept, not from fear, but recognition. He left the chapel in silence, barefoot, and walked to the Carroway house. He hummed a tune older than the Psalms, one no one should remember, and stood at the gate until a door opened. No one saw which sister greeted him. By then their faces had changed, blurred with time too similar to separate. The door closed behind him. The house swallowed him. No light flickered that night, but all across Dogwood the infant slept without breath, without sound, without dreams. The womb, beneath the altar. At dawn the chapel was found altered again. The pews had been stacked in threes, bound together with red thread, umbilical, not cotton. The altar had cracked further, and from within it a hollow had opened, womb-shaped, lined with soot and claw marks. Parson Authridge's Bible lay inside. The pages had been sewn shut with gold filament. No one touched it. No one dared. The fog thickened. Time folded. People forgot their names, their neighbors, their children. But they remembered the sisters. They remembered the feel of their hands, cool and dry like pressed petals. They remembered the way their breath lingered like lullabies in rooms never meant for singing. They remembered the bowls, the threads, the silence between breaths. And in the moments before sleep, if sleep still came, they remembered something brushing the hair from their forehead. Gently, lovingly, as if to say, "Shh, you were always ours." The house that held its breath by the first frost of 1847. Dogwood Parish had gone quiet in a way that suggested not peace but anticipation. No smoke rose from chimneys, no letters arrived, no bells rang. The town, once recorded in detail by circuit riders and land clerks, had vanished from maps as though erased by memory itself. But the Carroway house remained. It leaned heavier now, as though bearing the weight of something unseen pressing against its upper rooms. The shutters never opened, the curtains never stirred. Yet some swore they saw silhouettes in the windows, tall, swaying their arms folded around something too small to be seen from the road. Something that pulsed. Something that breathed. The last official record of a visitor came from Elias Penn, a young tax clerk sent from Westboro. Bright-eyed, full of pipe tobacco, and God Elias was charged with cataloguing abandoned property and collecting debts long buried in county margins. He arrived whistling, unaware. In his satchel, he carried a writ of seizure for the Carroway land. He stayed the night in a vacant cabin on the parish edge, ate beans from a tin, took off his boots and placed them neatly by the door. He was never seen again. No child unclaimed weeks passed. Then one morning, a widow gathering firewood found Elias Penn's boots placed side by side on the chapel steps, tied with thread the color of bleached milk. Inside each boot rested a single vertebra, polished warm to the touch. His satchel had been nailed to the chapel door. All its pages were missing, all but one. Pinned with a twisted hairpin shaped like a cradle, the remaining sheet read, "Only property transferred. No child unclaimed." After that, the church doors would no longer open. The hinges bent inward, resisting. Families began boarding up their homes, not to keep something out, but to keep something in. Salt lines were drawn beneath windows. Mirrors were turned toward the walls. Cribs were dismantled. Yet births still happened. Too early. Or not at all. One woman labored 16 hours only to deliver a bundle of cloth and roots stitched together like a child's practice doll. She named it anyway, swaddled it, held it close. 3 nights later, she died in her sleep, eyes open, womb intact. The doll remained warm for 2 days. No rot, no scent, only breath. Keepers of what should not return. It became clear then, even to those who clung to faith like kindling, that the Carroway sisters had never been midwives. They were keepers. Keepers of the stitched, keepers of the remembered. Keepers of what had slipped through the veil and refused to forget the body that once held them. They no longer visited the sick, no longer attended birth. Their presence was no longer marked by arrival. It was marked by stillness, by the absence of wind, by chairs turned ever so slightly when no one was home, by sheets folded at corners no hand had touched. Each night floorboards creaked under invisible weight. The ridge no longer loomed, it nested. The town didn't sleep in fear. It slept in surrender. Recognition in the fog. Newcomers who stumbled upon dogwood traders, missionaries' lost riders, felt the same thing before they even reached the ridge recognition. They couldn't explain it, but they dreamt of the crooked house. They had seen its windows in sleep, felt its cradle-shaped doorway curve inward like memory. One man, a butcher from Calhoun, removed his hat and fell to his knees before the ridge. He wept without sound. When asked what he saw, he answered, "The room I was born in, the one no one remembers." His body was found days later, laid out across a patch of furrowed earth. Arms open, mouth unhinged. A tree nearby bore the imprint of a swaddled infant pressed into its bark, deep, clean, deliberate. The tree wept sap for 7 days. Circles in ash teeth in threads. Children left in dogwood began drawing again, not with chalk or ink, but with instinct. Circles in ash, circles in spilled milk, circles in the condensation on windows, in the dust on floorboards. Always the same 3 points, one high, 2 low. A cradle shape. They etched it into walls, into fabric, into their own forearms with pins, teeth, or nails. The schoolhouse, long since abandoned, bore them like tattoos, spiraled tight, endless, etched into desks, railing, stairwells, and above them all, drawn in soot across the bell tower's collapsed ceiling, a massive inverted cradle flanked by rows of teeth. A boy 9 years old silent since autumn, entered the chapel, ruins with a bundle wrapped in wool. He placed it gently on the cracked pulpit. It pulsed, not like a heartbeat, like breath. He turned to no one and said, "Not all births come from blood." And somewhere beneath the ridge something began to hum again, not with joy, but with memory. Thread in places no thread should be. Late July brought the sowing again. Thread appeared where no thread belonged, braided into horse manes, woven between fence slats, coiled inside ears of corn not yet husked. It was pale, almost translucent, sticky like sap drawn from something not yet cooled. The air shifted as it did before a storm, but no rain came. Just the smell, sweet not sugar, thick not rot. Those who tried to burn the thread said it didn't ignite. It curled instead, releasing a sound like breath caught in a throat, a soft click-click like needles through skin. No one spoke of the Carroway sisters anymore, not because they were gone, but because everyone understood something more frightening. Saying their names wasn't summoning, it was offering. It was Ruthie Cooper who found the last cloth. It was folded neatly on the threshold of the abandoned schoolhouse, dyed in a color too dark to be called red, too warm to be brown. 3 stitched symbols marked its front. No woman could name them, but every old mother who saw them flinched. Ruthie thought it was a doll's blanket. She wrapped it around a hay bundle and rocked it in her arms, singing lullabies. That night her parents woke to find her standing at their bedside. Her hands clutched her own throat. Her palms were raw. Her lips bore needle pricks. On her tongue, tight and bloodless, was a stitch. And when the doctor examined her, he found her tongue gone, not removed, not scarred, but gone as if it had retreated inward back into whatever had first given it shape. Watching without wings. That same week the birds returned to Dogwood, but not as before. They came without song. They perched in straight lines on rooftops and chimney flues, watching windows with still heads and black eyes. They followed mothers carrying infants, hovered near cradles, waited outside doors. And the sound began again. Not the high keening wail of mourning, nor the low breath of a lullaby. This was the sound of wood rocking gently against wood, hundreds of cradles empty but swaying. The sound came only when the wind was still. One woman, braver or more broken than the rest, followed the noise into the fog. She found them 100 cradles aligned in perfect rows, rocking slowly under the moonless sky. At their center stood the sisters. Ha at the front, her eyes closed. On Eunice beside her, one hand lifted. And Marbth at the back, her fingers held wide, thread pulled taut between them, not sewing, not weaving, but listening, as if the thread whispered secrets only she could hear. The woman turned and fled. By dawn, her wrists were stitched together with that same translucent fiber. Beneath her blouse, 6 curved dots like a second spine. She never spoke again. But she hummed, the yield of hollow harvests. By August's end, Dogwood no longer resembled a town. Wells tasted of bone. Fields bore crops that could not be eaten, boneless squash, brittle corn fruit with empty cores. Chickens laid eggs shaped like droplets, filled with pulp silk and sometimes soft teeth. One farmer cracked an egg and found a jawbone inside. It was still warm. He packed a wagon with salt blocks and hymnals, loaded his daughter, and left. He was last heard whispering, "They are not births, they are returns." And still children were found, none born, all placed, each wrapped in cloth, each bearing 6 dots along the spine. One child opened its eyes, once its pupils vertical. It never blinked, it never breathed, but when the midwife touched it, she felt a second heart beat beneath her own. She never delivered again. And as summer choked its way toward autumn, the sewing returned in waves, thread woven into hinges through hay across the seams of old christening gowns. Those who tried to pull the thread found it stuck to skin as if it had grown from them. The cradle grown from memory. The final sign came in silence. In the chapel, ruins where no floorboards remained and the altar had split into ash, a new cradle appeared not built, but grown. Its wood curled like ribs, smooth as breath, the grain spiraling inward like muscle. Inside it a bundle of linens marked with a single stitch, 3 loops spiraled tight, identical to the seal once burned into the Carroway door. Those who saw it said it pulsed not with life, but with memory. No one touched it. No one prayed. That night the wind stopped altogether. The Carroway house, crooked and watchful, vanished. Not in fire, not in collapse. One moment it was there, leaning gently into the fog. The next it was gone. In its place a depression in the earth, wide as a basin, deep and lined with pale strands of hair. The snow that came that night did not fall there. The air above it did not stir, but a scent lingered. Sweet milk, pine, and something older saltcloth and the iron tang of blood rinsed too many times. Lullabies, with no beginning, no end. By morning the last of Dogwood gathered at the basin's edge. They did not speak, they did not move. Some wept, some smiled. All stood with hands folded over their chests, facing the hollow that had once been the Carroway house. One by one they began to hum. It was not a song, not a hymn. It was the sound of the womb remembered, the vibration of being held, of silence before breath, of heartbeat before name. The lullaby sung by a mouth that had never been born. And when the snow melted, there was no town, no road, no mail. Dogwood Parish was unmarked on every map. But somewhere, when the night is still enough, mothers still wake suddenly, clutching their bellies, unsure why. And in the distance something rocks, not with wind, not with motion, but with memory.